right. Hi, Adesesun. Good evening.
Hi, Blessing. Good evening.
Good evening. Trust you're good.
Yeah, I'm very well, and you?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking. All right, it's your time now, so you can.
Okay, great. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen.
You can see
All right,
your screen.
great. Hi everyone. So I am Adebayo Adesegun Daniel, and to be honest, first few minutes of the meeting is like I'm coming to war because it seems like everyone has had like sort of like an experience with engineering teams where it hasn't been too pleasant. And like it was earlier mentioned, probably we are coming to clear up what the buzz boost has been between engineering team and the other cross-functional teams in an organization. So yeah, so let's just get into it. So today, we're just going to be looking at a few points, and then from my personal view or experience, just doing a mic check to be sure you're hearing me very well.
Yes, yes, we can hear you very well.
Great. Yeah, so today we're talking about how to collaborate effectively with engineering teams, and I think one of the things that I heard from the onset has been that there's been some sort of friction communicating with the engineering team. And, one of the things that could make something not to be effective and have like friction like between two moving parts, for example, when you're rubbing your two palms together, right, you could have friction. But when there's a third layer involved, a third substance or something involved, maybe like a grease or something, you discover that between two palms where there was actually friction, it becomes easy to rub them together without generating the initial friction that was being experienced. So the first thing I'll be talking about today is we're looking at the big picture of collaboration, right? So when I was looking at this topic, one of the things I was trying to look back at how my career has, gone is the fact that collaboration itself is more or less something that is always needed in whatever teams, right? And it's not really limited to the engineering space. It's not limited to how product managers and engineers have to work hand in hand. It's not limited to that. And I think the best analogy that I was able to come up with and think about is the analogy of building a house. For example, if you want to start a construction project, you want to start something, you want to build, even if it's just a one room construction project, right? You need synergy, you need collaboration between, for example, a bricklayer, you need collaboration between maybe the site owner, you need collaboration between different parts, because not just one person cannot build a room, one person cannot build a house, one person cannot build a bungalow. Talk more of maybe a six-story building, right? So collaboration is more or less like having a good coordination, right? There has to be coordination between each part of, in this metaphoric example, each part of the parties that are involved in you know getting this construction out, right? And one of the things that makes teams, engineering teams that are successful, one of the things that make them successful is the fact that collaboration is very much inbuilt into how their operations, how they carry out their operations. And for example, imagine if I'm building a house, right? We're talking about construction here, right? And I'm building something, and along the line, as a painter, for example, right? And you know that most times when painters come to do their own work, um, the whole architecture of the building, the frames, the cement, the plastering, so many things would have gone on and happened, right? And after those things have happened, right, there's usually like a communication from the site manager. Okay, painters, it's time for you to start doing your own parts of the assignment. And when those painters come around and they start painting, they make everything beautiful. Now imagine there was no communication, there was no synergy, there was nothing going on between the construction site workers, and the painter just comes one day without getting notification. Probably he looked at the walls and thought that this walls look ready, but the plan the site manager might have had is that that particular section of the wall, they needed maybe to break it down to make like a new section of something, right? And because the painter didn't have like the right information, probably just went ahead and just started, they just started painting that side of the building. And the site manager comes around and says, "Oh, you're not meant to paint that place. We still have XYZ plans for that place." And what happens is that the painters have done what they consider to be as work, but the site manager doesn't see it as work because they applied their output and work to something that was not needed. And that's what happens a lot of times with engineering things, for example. And when there's no like this collaboration, then there's no communication. A lot of times you could find maybe engineers just go ahead and they're working on some particular things or some particular features that are not necessarily that they are like they don't necessarily fit into the whole picture of the company goal or the whole picture of how the expectation of what the product would be at a certain time. And when that collaboration is not there, it's easy to like just veer off um from it's easy to like just veer off from the goal. The next slides we'll be talking about goal, right? But I just wanted us to look at this I just wanted us to look at this big picture of the whole building architecture thing to like get an idea of where I'm coming from. Funny enough, it feels like I'm talking to myself because
I'm not sure.
Hello, am I the only one?
You're not the only one. I guess it's network or something that's going on. So let's see if it's gonna um
there have been a
happen.
group of persons.
Oh, Adesegun, we lost you for a minute.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, let me see. Okay. All right, so okay, let me just continue from anywhere. I really don't know when the network went off. Yeah, so I was talking about the whole analogy of architecture and construction, right? So I think one of the things I said last was that one of the things what makes some product or some businesses successful is the fact that each and every individual contributing to the development of a project or products, right? They rightly understand what their role is. And because they rightly understand what their role is, it becomes easy. It becomes like very, very much easy to fit in. Like, for example, if I'm on a construction site and I know that my work is I'm a mason there, and I put my all into being a mason, and I understand my objective. I'm receiving the right communication from the site managers and quarters, and so many other things. It becomes easy for me to do my work or be guided. Moving on to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about the fact that you cannot expect to have the right collaboration if you don't have like clear goals, right? So it's important that for any products, there needs to be an established set of goals. There needs to be established set of project goals, what the objectives may be, or the deliverables. For example, in company-wide, we have things like KPIs, we have things like OKRs, right, and so many other things like that, right? And if we don't have like the right goals, if for example I'm trying to build, let's say I'm trying to build like an e-commerce solution, right? And I've split up the fact that I want some certain features to be delivered over a certain period of time. Maybe in a year, I say every quarter we're going to be delivering some particular features, right? And it becomes easier when those project goals with milestones and timeline are set down for everyone to be able to like have a glimpse of it. So and when there are project goals, right, it becomes easier to align with those project goals and objectives, and just work with it. Because in the absence of goals, what will happen is that there will always be a changing focus, right? When there are no goals, if I'm working on something today, and probably we've already said we just started working on something, on a feature, and we were like halfway through it, almost get it to launch and all of that. And um
Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if I'm the only one.
It's not just you, except like it's everyone. Guessing is this network. Can someone just please type in the chat? Can someone type in the chat box? We can hear you to call his
engineering.
attention.
Hello.
Yeah, we lost you again for another minute.
Okay, you know what, give me a minute.
Okay,
Let me check my network.
okay.
Hi, Blessing.
Hi, Abby.
Yeah, in the meantime, are we going to have item 7?
You guys on item 7. Leave me alone. Oh my goodness. How do we do this item 7, King?
I don't know now. For some of us who are not based in Abuja, what are we going to do? Are we just going to be left alone?
Ah, don't worry. Lagos, you're in Lagos, right? Oh, you're in Portugal. I just think we should do giveaway. Juliana, you people should leave me alone. Don't worry, we would baby your item 7, DHL to
Hopefully.
Portugal. So, right. So yeah, don't worry. Do not worry. But yes, I believe that this session has been, enlightening, and yeah, I feel like we're getting to it.
I know.
We're getting to it.
I don't want to be pessimistic, right? Personally, I just feel most of these engineers, right, are by default somehow weird. I don't think I've ever seen any engineer that is normal before in my life. Most of them are always weird, and they're always, as in even their looks. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to body shame anybody. Even their looks, when you see them, you see this nerdy look, you see this weird look, and even to engage them is always somehow difficult, at least as far as I am concerned.
Right. Like I've actually met. I know what you're talking about. I've met engineers like that as well before, and trust me, I can. Before I normally drag them. It's just recently I stopped dragging them because You know about community people things. Blessing is always dragging developers. I'm not sure why. Right.
Another question I have, is it that the coding thing turns them to beast or what? Like, I just want to understand how they think, basically.
You know what? You know what? Let's do this. Let us um put these our questions right in the chat box so that
Absolutely.
when yes, so that when Adesegun comes, it's gonna
Yeah, I'm
um
actually back, and
okay. He
I've
said,
been head shading.
oh my goodness.
Well, it's no problem.
Right, right. Okay. You can just go ahead, then we'll take the questions after. So you guys, you can
Right,
just drop your
sure.
questions in the chat box and Adesegun is gonna attend to it when we're done.
Okay, so right, Abby says engineers are weird. I think I don't know. I don't believe that, anyways, but I guess. So yeah, so we're talking about clearly defining project goals, objectives, and deliverables, right? And okay, I'm just going to skip away from that. And another major thing for engineering things, right? And what usually happens is that when there's no like understanding, for example, maybe a product designer has envisaged how a particular product will work, and has tried as much as possible to like put in the design and some other documentation and all of that, right? And one of the things that usually happens a lot during product development is the fact that um, context usually could differ between the different cross-functional teams, right? For example, the engineering team could have like a different context of how a solution should be, maybe from a technical perspective, right? And the product team, for example, could have like a different context, right? And what will be needed to ensure that there's like the right, the first thing we said is collaboration, and the right like having the right discussion should be that there's that understanding where the context that the engineer has and the context that the product designer has, we collapse both of it, and everyone has that shared context. And maybe it's something as simple as what the design flow for the authentication should be, right? And probably the designer is thinking, okay, maybe when the user signs up, they get sent an email and a phone number, and maybe the engineer is thinking, for example, that okay, this product, for example, is just a product that probably the users will only most likely interface with it with their mobile phones, and most of the functionality looks as if it's going to be with their mobile number and stuffs like that. And there could be that context difference, and those questions may arise, right? So when there's this shared understanding, when those contexts collide, and after colliding they come together and they become one, and the two things are able to view things from the same perspective, it becomes easier to actually collaborate and work together because we have a shared understanding. We have a shared goal for each feature. So when you're talking about something, maybe product designers kind of explain a particular workflow, right? What he might, even in discussions as human beings, when I'm talking about, like, maybe if I'm talking about football, for example, and the kind of perspective or context I may have to football, maybe the finance around football, how I perceive maybe some players are overvalued, right? My perspective may be different from the perspective of the next person who thinks that there's a justifiable reason for why some players are overvalued and so many other things, right? So when there's that understanding, when we talk together and we explain and we're able to communicate what our understanding is, it becomes easy to collaborate because we just come into the same picture, right? And then the most important thing about goals is that these goals are actually documented, right? We are humans, we get overloaded, especially engineers, designers, we get overloaded with a lot of business requirements. We've had gone through so many meetings with the business, so many meetings with maybe it could be that we're developing for an external contractor, for example. We've been in so many meetings, we've received, in fact, their own context have already come and tried to maybe confuse us at some point, right? But what is important is that when these goals have been discussed, set, agreed on, we all understand those goals. Like, the next thing is to make sure that these goals are documented, because for reference sake, we might have spoken at some point, agreed, but probably somebody from either team went on and maybe was doing something else, and that context from that something else overflowed into their current understanding. Or maybe I'm working on like three products, right? And the context I had on product B sort of overflowed into product A. And because of the conversation I've had with product A, right, with the product manager, and I, I might have forgotten and just mixed up those understanding on context, right? And if there are no documentation, there's no way for me to be able to go back to somewhere, to a document, and actually go see exactly, oh, this is what we actually talked about, right? Then another thing about documentation, about that documenting goals rather, is that um it also serves as a repository for maybe like future teams, future engineers. For example, 5 persons start a project, maybe two persons leave the team maybe after 6 months or after a year, right? The understanding that the initial team might have about the product might get diluted by over the next couple of months, right? But if there's like a document that keeps a history of things, history of discussion, history of the goals, like talk about the goals and every other thing, it becomes easy for new engineers that may not have had context on what the previous discussion or goals, or project goals, outline deliverables of the project might have been. They can go through the documentation and just easily click and say, oh, this is what we're talking about, and it just becomes easy to get that understanding, right? So also, one major thing that usually happens in product development is the fact that the engineering team sometimes doesn't get involved early in decision making, right? And it's very, 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 very important to engage the engineering team from the beginning of the development of any project, even as at the point where we're trying to like think things through, right? Trying to see how like features will work and so many other things, right? It's very important that the engineering team is included early enough, right? Because if we are all going to be working on a product or a project together, it's very important that early feedback is received, right? And it becomes easy where if there may be some things that you know what usually happens is that down the line, when the engineers are not involved, they might have, maybe some persons might have thought up some things and like, oh, this is really going to be really cool, right? And piecing out those things together, and it gets to the point where, oh, we're trying to, and when the things are being pieced out together, it could be like, oh, looking at this thing from the design perspective, we like, "Oh, this thing shouldn't take much time now. It's just to, develop this and that, put this together, and maybe within 3 months, 6 months, it's going to be out. We shouldn't have like problems with that, right? But when there's like an engineer or the engineering thing involved from the onset, it becomes easy to like be able to properly scope what's maybe to be able to scope the timeline, for example, like looking at the whole features that we were discussing, it becomes easy to like scope the timeline and say, oh, 3 months to 6 months maybe may not be enough for the features we're trying to push out for this particular product, right? And just involving the engineering team early has a lot of advantages, right? And I think one more thing that I would say to that is that it becomes easy to spot where the teams might come to a point where they experience what's the word I would use now? They experience like I don't want to use slowness, right? They experience like a regression in progress, right? So yeah, so when the whole I'll just put it that where they experience a regression in progress, right? Just because of time. So I can go to the next thing, right? So another thing that is very important is the fact that project management tools, like it cannot be overemphasized. I've had I won't call it due pleasure, I'll call it undue pleasure of working on project or at companies where project management tools were not properly used, right? And trust me, it was like really, really difficult. Probably because I've had some years of experience and maybe I'm an oldie some way. But I know that in today, in most teams, right, project management tools are like the default thing that people utilize to ensure that there's the right communication between the different teams, right? So, for example, we're trying to scope out a product, for example, and I will use my earlier analogy of the whole authentication flow, right? And while scoping out this product, one of the important things is that when we're scoping out scoping out a module, it's important that when you're using the project management tools, you break down these tasks correctly, right? You break down the task correctly. I've met product managers that they just break down the top level, right? They break down the top level, and it's just okay to the engineers. Okay, you can have your engineering meetings, break it down into what or into the different engineering tasks that might be needed for that particular module or project, right? But the major thing is that the project managers management tools are very important, right? Because it helps to keep track. For example, I may have multiple things in progress, right? And because I'm using like a Jira, for example, because I use Jira a lot, I'm using like a Jira, for example, it becomes very easy for me to like track my progress across. I might be working on multiple products, right? And multiple products could have different boards, and I'm able to track my progress across the different boards. Because, for example, one of the things is that product managers may feel that, oh, maybe these developers are not quite productive. They're not delivering quickly as they ought to. And what might happen a lot of times is that some engineers miss out on adding maybe the tiniest little things that ought to be on the board. They might be working on it, right, as part of the whole, maybe like a part of a task, for example, right? But then if that little thing that they are working on that may even take 2 days, a tax, maybe we've done a story estimate, for example, we said that a tax should take nothing more than 3 days, right? And while trying to work on that tax, discover you have to do like an external integration that will take an extra time, right? And if the engineer doesn't specify as a subtask under that tax that this is the internal integration that I'm working on to make sure that the main tax itself gets completed, the point of view of the product manager might be or would be that the engineer is not being productive, right? Come on, this task, why haven't you finished it since, right? But then the engineer hasn't communicated that, oh, these are the stuff that I'm doing and all of that, right? So it's a cut over. So it's also essential that the product manager is also able to identify with the engineer, discuss, and get to know that, okay, let's break down this task further. Ensure that the engineer breaks down the task further to have subtasks that clearly outlines everything that is needed to complete the task itself. Yeah, so another thing that's important is communication. One of the things that I have seen that works for teams that are successful is that communication cannot be, even we can't say communication can be overestimated or something. Like, there has to be open and frequent communications with engineering teams, because a lot of times it might even be that the initial insight of how we wanted to build a particular feature changed, right? Probably we were trying to, where okay, let me give an example, right? I'm trying to integrate, we're trying to build a feature, right? I'm going to use simple examples. I'm trying to build a feature that sends out SMS to the customers after they sign up, right? And there was a product decision to go with a particular provider, and the product decision was communicated to the engineering team. The engineering team already has it on their black backlog, probably moved it in progress and started working on it, right? And along the line, it was discovered that probably that provider was too expensive, and we needed to switch to another provider. And what might happen sometimes could be that the product team might be having conversations already, trying to get another provider, and to another provider that has cheaper price, but haven't communicated with the engineering team that they need to stop work on the current integration, because it will obviously be wasted effort to integrate something that at the end of it we will not start integrating something else, because I could have used, or the engineers could have used that time to start working on something totally different if that communication had come in earlier, right? So it's important that open and frequent communications is done. And frequent communication has to do, I mean, the communication is open. For example, maybe you're a team that utilizes Slack, for example. It's very important that such communications go out in open channels, right? Where everybody can see it, right? And it's not that maybe there's a certain number of persons that got the notification, certain number of persons that have received that, but then the main people that ought to see this communication might not see it, because of course it's in the DM of someone. So it's important that open communication is literally utilized, right? So there are also various communication channels, meetings, emails, instant messaging, and project management tools. Although personally for me, sometimes, or maybe for engineers, sometimes we feel like meetings are a lot, right? Like a lot, right? So it might be useful that we utilize asynchronous type of communication, right? And asynchronous type of communication simply means that you just post maybe message on the Slack channel, and people are listening in, people are responding. For example, it could be like for daily stand-up, you have asynchronous daily stand-up where there might be a bot that posts, okay, you can please send in your your stand-up for today, and people just send their stand up for today. Because a lot of times what happens is that meeting has a way of, personally for me, meeting has a way of stressing me out, where once I'm done with a meeting, right, I need like some extra 30 minutes to recalibrate and get into the zone to start doing some mental work around maybe product development and all of that. Then also regularly update each other on progress, challenges, because what usually happens is that when maybe an engineer is expressing a challenge, right? Probably they don't communicate early. Also, it's also important that the product manager also is able to communicate with the engineers, trying to learn what challenges they're currently experiencing at the moment, and be able to. It might not necessarily, you might not necessarily be able to prefer a solution immediately, but just being informed, or just knowing that there is actually a challenge of somewhat, sort of gauges the kind of expectations you have. Maybe at the end of the week you're expecting something, and right, there's one tough integration or one unit test that is being like a stumbling block for that developer or that engineer at the moment. It may be difficult to meet up what the maybe sprint goal or the target is for that week. Yeah. So another important thing is celebrating achievements. It's very, very important, right? We are humans. We are all humans. Some person says engineers are weird and geeky, right? So we're all humans, right? And as humans, we usually enjoy, or let's just say we usually enjoy when our achievements are recognized, right? When there's a milestone that has been reached in timely manner, or a new feature development has gone out, has been released. It's very important that there's that feedback that shows that the work that is being done is appreciated, though, and it's very important that we also engage in positive reinforcement, because as humans, when someone positively reinforces us, there's this motivation and morale. Maybe for example, I may be feeling down and somebody's giving me maybe like a ginger, somebody's giving me words, encouraging me, and some other things like that. The closing time might be 5 p.m. I'll just decide as an engineer that, oh, I'm going to make sure that it works like 12 a.m. today, to make sure that this feature goes out early, right? Yeah, some person might say, no, I can't work past my my work time. But the truth is that when there's the right culture, when there's the right culture of celebrating achievement, like people naturally will go over and beyond to ensure that they deliver, right? And yeah, so I think that's about that for this. So I'll just move to the points where we can ask questions.
All right. Thank you so much for this amazing session. Yes, guys, I believe that you guys have questions, one or two, three questions that you might want to ask Odeshegun, right? So please let's get in or get come out with our questions. Right. Yes, guys. Abby, um, yes. Abby was good on raise his hands. I mean, please go ahead. If you have questions, please raise your hand so that we can identify you and you know have you ask your question. Abby, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Blessing. Hi, Shegun. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Just a quick disclaimer. What I said with respect to engineers being weird is just a personal opinion, and of course, based on my experience with most of the engineers, I can't speak for every other person. However, you made a very very valid point, and by coincidence as well, there's this assignment they gave us recently where they said we should read a book. I can't recall the name of the author right now, but the name of the book is Inspired. And one of the things I came across in that book, I highlighted this, which is the fact that most engineers do not really get to understand what the company is up to until when they need their service. For instance, at the time they are trying to come up with the product, none of the engineers are really brought on board until when it's time to, really, work on the project itself. You now start bringing on the engineer. Now, in that situation, right, and from that, from the explanation I've just given so far, it's not really as if maybe it's the fault of, a PM. All companies have their procedures, all companies have their vision and strategies. Some of these ideas come directly from the top and not necessarily the idea of the PM. In that situation, how do we manage a weird engineer? How do we manage an engineer that that you go and approach him now, he just starts giving you some sort of attitude simply because the policy of the company does not really bring them on board on time? I don't know if you understand the picture I'm trying to paint.
Yeah, so yeah, I think I understand that a bit. Okay, yeah, so I think yeah, different companies have, should I call it, different policies, just like you said, or different processes. And a lot of times, some companies say they operate or horizontal management process, right? Any other person can be able to reach out to anyone on top, just like any of their colleagues. And I think the product manager can as well be able to manage that communication line, right? As much as an engineer can, like you said, be weird, right? But I'll think weird in the context here could be like, um, correct me if I'm wrong, could be that they feel like they are being left out, right? I don't know if that works.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So weird in this context, like they feel like they're being left out, right? So, yeah, like you said, in a company where the conversation for maybe a new product has happened at the top level, and a lot of discussion has gone on about it, I think the easiest way to be able to get an engineer not being left out is to actually document those conversations and discussions, right? And it becomes easier to then share that documentation with the engineer. So maybe, for example, as the conversation maybe changes velocity, maybe changes scope, for example, maybe some other things are added to the conversation, right? Having the right documentation can be shared with that engineer or even the engineering team before they are added to the main conversation with itself works pretty fine, because a lot of times I've worked with teams where the product manager, for example, starts scoping out the different user stories, right? And while the product manager is scoping out the different user stories, like everything that needs to be done about that product, that document has already been shared with the developer or the engineering team. And what usually happens, for example, like in my own case, we use Notion. And what usually happens is that where we have questions, for example, we can just ask questions on the Notion document to just get clarity. And what happens at the end of it is that you don't feel left out, because there's that document that is always going to be updated, whatever with whatever conversation has happened with top level management, whatever process they are thinking, whatever future, feature rather, that they are thinking about at that moment, right? Once that document is in place and shared, it becomes easy to just share that document with the engineering team. And your own is just keep updating it, or just buzz the engineering team. Hey guys, I've added XYZ information to this document. Please review, or please look at it, or something, right? Yeah, so but that's what I've seen has worked in a couple of places that I've worked at. Yeah.
Thank you. That does it. Thank you.
All right. Welcome.
Okay. Do we have questions? Questions, guys. Let's ask the questions if we have questions. Um, yeah, thank you so much for this amazing session. I think the part I picked was the communication part. Right. I mean, importantly, communication is really important. I think that's where most times the stiff is always at, you know, clear communications and maybe clear expectations as well. Right. Yes, do we have other questions? Guys, I know you people have questions. Are you scared? Are you scared
If,
to
if,
ask?
if nobody has question, I have a question, right?
Okay,
And
great.
it's been nice to see in the comments. So, so as product designer, what has been like the biggest pain points for you personally working with an engineer? What has been the biggest pain points?
Product managers, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's answer. Let's answer through the chat box, or you raise your hand if you want to answer. What has been the biggest pain point for you as a product manager with engineers? Let's go. Oche, B, B, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Adesegun, for that. Basically, for me, it's one of the clear understanding of particular feature, particular tasks you are giving to them. I think
Yeah.
that's like my major challenge I have. Why? Because and also in terms of timing. Okay, let me say for example, we don't use user story, we don't use user story, we use more of tax Azure board, and it's quite, I think basically they use hours instead of points. So
Okay.
basically they can tell you, I will ask basically how many hours you want to work on this project.
Mhm.
Someone might say 2 hours. Do you get? And find out by the time I check back after 2 hours, the person might not start
Yeah.
the project. So in terms of I think the estimation time sometimes is quite challenging. And that was basically why I asked them in terms of productivity, because
Mhm.
um I don't know whether we measure it, because it's one of those things I feel we should be doing as a whole, as a product manager. Basically, it's just basically for us to understand how this person is working, the capacity. That's just basically my own challenge, understanding and time management. I think one of those things that's very, very poor I've seen so far.
Okay. I think if I was to comment on that, I think one of the major things that happens is that um there are two things that happen, right? Is the fact that engineers sometimes don't know how to correctly measure their tax, right? And especially when that tax is something they have never done before, right? And which now brings into case point that somebody over promises and say I'm going to deliver something in 3 hours, and after post 3 hours, there's nothing to show for it, for the whole time and promises that has already been made, and that's like a common scenario experience that usually happens, right? And I think that's because engineers a lot of times don't know how to properly properly estimate the number of hours. And then secondly, another thing that might happen, like, okay, if I would speak from the engineer perspective, is that I might have said I'm going to, let's say for example, I'm meant to integrate like to a third party, right? And when trying to integrate to the third party, I've spoken, I've promised I'm going to get this done in 2 hours. This documentation looks pretty simple, right? And while trying to complete all of that, I then realized that going through the documentation, I discovered that one or two things did not look or does not look right with the documentation. And then when working on the APIs, and I discovered that in actual fact, the APIs are actually pretty much faulty, right? And you know, at the end of it, what might have happened is that I promised that I'll be done with this thing in 2 hours. But because of so many things I discovered while trying to work on that task, I then realized that I then realized, for example, I then realized an engineer that I'm really not going to be able to complete this in 2 hours, right? So though that can be some kind of scenario that happens sometimes with engineers, right? Yeah. So I'm not exonerating the fact that some persons would say will commit some time to complete the task and probably just go off to just do something else, right? And at the end of it, they don't get work done when it needs to be done. But a common thing that I've seen is not being able to properly estimate tasks. Yeah.
All right, thanks. I have question, but I will allow people to first answer your question before I go ahead.
All
You
right.
can just go ahead. I'm not sure there's anyone that has question. So just go ahead. If anyone has question, they will raise their hand. So yes,
Okay.
please go ahead.
All right. My question is one. I think I mentioned it quite. How do you measure the team productivity? I'm not talking about the OKRs, and I'm not talking about what's it called, and all those metrics. I'm talking about the team's productivity. What I meant is in terms of implementation of bugs, when PRs are being raised, how do you measure those things? Those PR delays for like 2 3 hours or 3 days before it's been implemented. Because those are the factors that will help us to know that at the end of each sprint, we were able to achieve that particular goal we were expecting. And the second question is, how do you deal with dependencies in terms of internal and externals? Because I believe most of the features we are working on is aligned with what's it called roadmaps. And let me say, for example, one particular feature, maybe you're meant to start this particular feature, this particular, and definitely you have some dependence on some other department or some other teams members. Are you going to start that work at that present moment when you know that those particular work, that particular feature, we might not be able to achieve it at that moment? So those are the challenges I'm trying to, or the questions I'm trying to throw to you. How do you manage those dependencies?
Okay. I think I'll first start with managing dependencies. To be honest, it's we usually have little to like little should I use little? Okay, let me give an example, a scenario before I talk about that, right? So there was a point that I had like a PR, and that PR I was on my own team, like the only backend engineer on my own team, right? And there were other things with other backend engineers, right? So I had this PR that needed to go out, and because the backend engineers on the other team had already prioritized their own work, and due to the fact they had prioritized their own work, they didn't have like enough bandwidth to take in new work, because to actually review a PR, you need to even have an understanding of what features the person is trying to implement, right? You need to have context. You're checking for a lot of things. You're checking for code correctness. You're checking for code smells. You're checking to ensure that everything is properly unit tested. You're checking to ensure that the feature is properly implemented, and every user stories on the task itself has been properly dealt with in that particular period, right? So, and if I'm already busy with my own tasks, trying to complete my own tasks for a sprint, it may get difficult to have enough bandwidth to even look at the PR of another person in the sprint. So, what I have seen to solve this is that I've seen product managers ensure that during a sprint, they allot time, right? They allot time for PR reviews also. And it's not that every other fact that is added to that sprint is only the like the time allocation and everything is only it only speaks to the work that needs to be done. Like, let us just ship this feature out, right? There needs to be like an extra time that needs to be allocated, and this time has to be set aside for PR, like PR reviews. And if it means that we don't need to jam pack too many things into a sprint, to make sure that we have enough time to even review, because there are times when there's no enough bandwidth to review things in that sprint. That same PR overflows to the next sprint, right? And that's because the time allotment within that sprint only allows for work to be done. Maybe doesn't allow some extra bandwidth for that. And I think the second question is around how to, I think, improve productivity, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I think to improve the productivity and to make sure that engineers are able to like deliver um tasks quickly. Now, I've been in cases where we start a new sprint and we've started this sprint, but yet the tasks that some engineers are giving, they literally have no understanding of the tasks, right? And it is now within that sprint, we're not trying to understand what that task needs to do, or what are the things, okay, what is this task talking about, what are the things I need to add and stuff like that. So you're already spending time within that sprint to understand what your tasks or your tasks are, right? And usually when allotting time for that task within the sprint, you may not even add time to, there are some product managers I've met that they add a task to investigate, like an investigation task or a study task. Like maybe in this sprint, we've added a task to understand the context of what a task that needs to be added in the next sprint. Yeah, to understand the task that needs to be added in the next sprint, right? So those kind of things to ensure that one of the things, the first thing is to ensure that the task that we're actually even giving this engineer, does he or she understand it, first of all? Because if I'm spending time to understand the task within that sprint, I've already wasted time. Literally, I've wasted engineering hours already, right? So it's important that we have like I think what they call it grooming sections also. It's important that the grooming sections for a new sprint literally ensures that every engineer is aligned to what they attack. They actually understand the requirement, they understand that these are the third parties we need to integrate to, and all those other things, right? And if there needs to be that you've already as a product manager envisaged that these are the things that we need to work on the next sprint, right? You can add a task within that current sprint, and that task is to study, investigate, understand the next task in the next sprint, right? So it's no longer the case of we're starting a new sprint and I'm trying to understand like what all of this is in the task description of what needs to be done. Yeah, so that's what I
All
had to
right.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Awesome.
If I still have further questions, I'll ask.
All
Yeah.
right, no problem.
All right.
Right. All right, guys. Do we have other questions? Do we have other questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand so that we can take your question before the session goes or comes to an end. Any question? Any question? Oh, Stonebridge. Okay. Any question, guys? Do we have any question? All right. Innova Lab is here. I'm not sure if Innova Lab wants to say anything. Yes, guys, please do not forget to go to your socials and write some things that you've learned. I mean, Adesegun has said some really important things about collaborating effectively with the engineering team, and I feel like you guys can also share as well. Do we have questions? So yes, you can go to your social media um to share and tag InnovaLab, tag Adesegun as well, and of course, yes, tag us so that we can have a repost of the feedbacks in this session. Do we have other questions before we get to the
All right, let me
conversation?
just lay on what I've said earlier. Let me just
Oh,
lay out one question. So why I'm asking this question is because of my experience, and I think we can learn one or two from it. Basically, okay, let me just give a scenario what happened. It's not to me, it's one of my friend that is a product manager. There's this particular feature they've already scoped they are going to work on. They have a clear understanding of it. And what happened was, I think when they were doing the scenarios, possible scenarios of this particular feature, I think the engineer had a particular perspective, but he decided to keep quiet. Do you get?
Yeah.
So he didn't, because definitely, when you are collaborating, you bring ideas. This thing can work, this thing cannot work, like this stuff like that. So what they really agreed on at the initial stage was, okay, I'll do A and B. Do you get? So by the time they've now finished at the end of the spring, they now realize that they forgot to do one particular thing. So what now happened was that the engineer was now like blaming the product manager that it's because, do you get, you did not factor this in. That was why. Do you get? Whereas he already knows, he has an idea, has a concept of what he was saying, but he
Yeah.
did not bring that perspective into when they were doing the sprint planning. So that really affected the product. So I understand that, yes, because if you are saying collaboration and I think one
Right.
of
So
the you
it
said,
is two-way
yeah,
street.
yeah. We need some. You talked about people engineering. We should align with them. They should have a conversation. Those kind of things. At least they throw it out to people. Give us your feature, and they did not do anything. And at the end, they were now complaining that it's the product manager's fault. So what? How can you deal with that kind of scenario? Because I feel like even though you have not fallen into that trap before, you
Yeah.
might fall into it eventually. So
Yeah. So I think it's just natural for like there to be conflicts, right? Um, especially when working on different products, right? And for your own scenario, the obviously the engineer wasn't quick enough to like bring what their own thoughts or their own context was as regards that product. And the funny thing is that I've also, like, one of my friends was talking to me about something where while trying to develop a product, he kept mentioning, right? He kept mentioning that a particular feature will cause something to happen. Like if they don't implement it, right? This is what actually this was what was going to happen, right? And they just put an oversight on it, right? And trust enough in few months that what he exactly mentioned actually happened, right? So to be honest, it's a two-way thing, and it just boils down to being able to deal with people. There are some persons naturally, eh, they want to see things born. They want to see things born, right? And they just want to be justified that um as maybe the other party obviously should be able to think about every other thing. Some person have the perspective that, oh, come on, this guy, you're being paid for this, you're being paid to think about that. You should be able to, you know, think about all of these things. So they may not want to tender their own opinions or ideas about how they think the product can improve or actually be better, right? And in this case, it's just important that one just um you know because what will happen might get to happen, right? But it's also important to be able to recover quickly, right? And a lot of times they might even be you may even be building a product and it might not even be that we've been able to see that might be the issue that might happen, right? And once we see this issue happen, it's just all hands on deck. Everybody, let's ensure that we let's ensure that we fix this or build that, right? So it might be difficult to have, what's the word now, might be difficult to have like a I'm looking for the right word to use. It might be difficult to have like a pre-plan or something that says this is how this person in my team might not, it might not contribute or give his context. Might be difficult to actually be able to patch that or handle that. But what is important is, what do I do after finding out that this was what needed to be done and this person refrained this context? I think I believe in open conversations, right? And you can be able to talk to your team and understand, okay, why didn't you talk about the fact that this needed to be added? Why? Well, like, it's just important to happen those open conversations, because at the end of it, what usually keeps team from properly collaborating or having like the right synergies, when they may be unspoken, I won't call it malice, right? But just unspoken differences. And like I said earlier, they are just some persons that just want to see the world burn. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right. I guess that would be the end of the question and answer, because I'm not sure anyone has questions. But yes, thank you, Adesegun, for this amazing, amazing session. I'm not sure if um I'm not sure if it's Banji that's on this um call, but I don't know if Innova Lab Institute can hear me and would like to say something to end the session. But yes, thank you, Adesegun, for this amazing session. We are super, super enlightened, and I believe that every one of us here has picked one or ten things, or maybe yeah, 1 or 10 things from this session, and it's awesome to hear from you. I mean, to hear from an engineer's perspective, point of view, right? So yes, thank you so much, and yes, guys, thank you as well. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the session, for your attendance, and